So what's more important, equality or freedom? Hello. One of the most important things that I think philosophy looks at is what's called the two freedoms. It's something that was written about extensively by writers as diverse as Kant and John Stuart Mill. And one of my favourite writers is Isaiah Berlin, who in the mid part of the last century, in the 1950s and 60s, wrote quite a lot about the conflict, the paradox between freedom and equality. And there's no simple answer to this one. Let's just think it through for a minute. Freedom is presumably the freedom to do things. We might call it liberty, your ability to engage with something, to do something that without restriction. So in our modern society, we might look at people's freedoms to express their sexuality or their political beliefs. And this is an important concept, clearly. We consider that we live in what we still call a free country with free speech, and these are important things. But the conflict is with equality, because of course equality is achieved by restricting people's freedoms, says Isaiah Berlin. This idea that in order for people to be, for example, free from slavery, and thereby being equal within society, you have to restrict other people's freedom to enslave people. And so far so good, and that absolutely makes great sense. But of course it does become more complex, because to what extent does one person's freedom conflict with another person's freedom, and to what extent does that then affect our equality? Because when you look at countries that attempt to express equality, an example might be the communist regime in China, where essentially people are restricted in their behaviours so that no one is advantaged over anyone else. And that's essentially, of course, what equality really amounts to. Now, you may look at the one-party state in China and say, well, that's clearly not a good thing because it hugely impacts and restricts people's freedoms. And so it does. But, of course, they might argue the result is that fewer people are left at the bottom of the pile, because, of course, there is a greater level of equality. It's, I suppose, what you might loosely call the ant's nest analogy. The idea that, of course, in an ant's nest, people don't have freedom, the ants don't have freedom. What they have is an equal team of ants all doing the different things and working in the different ways. So here's our challenge. When people speak of freedom, the Greek concept, for example, being eleutheria, they're talking about what we might think of as liberty. But it's interesting when you come to read the ancient Greek philosophers like Plato or like Aristotle, they don't see freedom as being necessarily a good thing. They, in fact, are describing, Plato in the Republic describes a society which is essentially controlled much more than we would expect it to be. So do you want a society that's controlled but as a result achieves perhaps a fairness or an equality for all those involved? Or do you want a society which is free, which gives liberty, eleutheria, and as a result, some people end up at the bottom of the pile because they become exploited or because they don't have the self-confidence to move things forward, or to achieve things in a way that they would otherwise want to do. So my challenge for you in this presentation is about whether you think it's more important to achieve that freedom or that equality. And I want to explore these two freedoms more in other talks and some of the conflicts that results in, and what we think is the best way to construct and organise our society. Thanks so much for watching. You notice I've got a new little thumbnail on YouTube, which is the date to help pick out when each one comes out. But remember, we do come out every Wednesday, 7:30. Like the video, and if you'd be so kind as to subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and please recommend it to your friends, neighbours and colleagues. It's been lovely to see you. Take care.